It has to be proportional to the damages that you suffer.
Unanimous.
And if it gets into this territory of being a penalty, it's gonna be disallowed. And here's the bigger gotcha for this. When you go in and are evicting a tenant, the judge is going to look at you, and the judge is gonna evaluate you as a landlord. And generally speaking, if they haven't paid you rent, you're gonna get them evicted, okay? But when it comes time for damages, the judges are gonna look at the way you drafted your lease and how you present yourself. And if you come in with things that are clearly not permissible, you lose credibility with the judge. And I view credibility as a stack of poker chips. And when you go in front of a judge, you put those stacks out with your arguments, and if you're successful, you get more back. And if you have improper late fees, or you have other things in your lease that are improper, you're gonna lose credibility, and that's gonna affect ultimately and potentially any damages awards that you could get. Okay, and here I discuss what a valid late fee is, so we've talked about this. If you want these explanations, it's in the book. It's available when we're done here. And I just lay it out here. A valid late fee is in a lease is intended to compensate the landlord for both the administrative expense and inconvenience in collecting late rent and the loss of use of rental income, okay? It may also serve as an incentive for the tenant to pay on time, but it cannot be a penalty, okay? All right, here is some language that's really important, and with COVID hit, this became super important because tenants were complaining about, well, we don't know who our landlord is or who we contact or whatnot. Your lease must have this information, okay? So make it clear, please, when you write a lease, make sure you put in that lease your address and your phone number. Now, that's fine if you've got a property manager and you don't want to have your name out there, but you need to have somebody there, because if you don't, when we start getting into litigation, I've seen this happen so many times. The judge looks at the landlord sitting next to me and says, well, how is the tenant supposed to pay you? How are they supposed to contact you? All right? And I will get back to this later. Guys, do not personally collect rent from tenants. Do not go and put it in your lease, I will pick up the rent. All right? I promise you, you will hate yourself the first time you run into a deadbeat tenant. Because guess what? If you're not racing out to collect the rent's not due, right? And if the tenant's not paying you, you're gonna have to go again and again and again. How many times you have to go to satisfy that judge for the eviction? Who knows? But I've had some of the craziest evictions I've ever litigated when the landlord put in, I will come and collect the rent. Okay? Don't do that. Give them an address, mail a check. Give them a Venmo or one of those new property management software programs where they can pay you online. Put the burden of paying where it legally belongs, which is on the tenant. The law says the tenant has to find you. If you live in Indiana, they have to come and put the rent in your hand. You're a creditor. And if they don't, you can evict. If you put that other language in, I'll come and pick it up, you're going to hate it. Okay, now,
Les is
here
gonna
is
get you some
something
seats.
that is a legal gotcha. It's a little bit
Yep.
nuanced, but every one of these things has happened to a client of mine. Okay, see what I've highlighted there? This is magic language that I put into my form of lease. And if you don't have it in your form of lease, I'm going to show you what can occur. This language says rent payment is first as a substantially contemporaneous exchange towards the advance rent due in the month that the payment is made. Has anybody ever rented a property to a tenant who filed bankruptcy? Show of hands. I see somebody raising their hand. How did that work out for you?
Not so well.
Not so well. What happened?
Basically, they got a stall, we had to hire an attorney to go in there and ask for red or something to get us outside of that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, here's the gotcha. When a tenant files bankruptcy, you need to engage an attorney immediately, okay? And the reason for that is there's this concept in bankruptcy law called the automatic stay. And basically what it means, the automatic stay means, is that if it means all creditors must stop all collection activities. Well, guess what? The tenant owes you money. What does that make you? Not only you're a landlord, you are a what? Creditor. Okay? And if you go around chasing that tenant for more rent, you're in violation of the automatic stay. And you know what happens? There are attorneys, particularly in Chicago, that prowl around for creditors who violate the automatic stay, and they turn around and sue you. And instead of the tenant owing you money, you end up owing that shark attorney thousands of dollars. The last time I had a client violate an automatic stay, the tenant had filed bankruptcy. The tenant filed bankruptcy after they were evicted. And my client inadvertently sent them a demand letter for the balance of the rent. And when it was all said and done, rather than the tenant paying them, my client had to pay this bankruptcy attorney about $5,000. Ouch. Okay, so here we go. We're gonna, Mo, Larry, and Curly here are gonna help us. Okay, trading rent for repairs. Who's ever done that? You got this house, and you got maybe the walls need some paint, you got a hole in them, and you got a tenant who's going to tell you how great they are with a paintbrush, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, problem solved. I'll give you some rent, and you do the work. Okay. These are some of the craziest evictions I've ever litigated, and I'm going to tell you why. The tenant never, ever gives you the quality of work that you're expecting. It's a bunch of just nonsense, okay? And what little work they do, they think they're entitled to golden coins for it. And eventually, you're going to realize this isn't a good deal because they're not paying you the rent or whatever, and you have to try and evict them, and it just goes crazy. Don't you ever do it. Now, I'm trying to have some fun here about never doing it. There might be a situation where you have to do it. Here's how you do it, guys. Okay? You don't trade rent for the work. Here's what you do. Tenant, the rent's $1,000 a month. You need to pay it on the first of the month without fail. Tenant, I'm going to hire you to do repairs. Give me your invoice, give me your estimate, and I'll sign off on it. You do the repairs, and I'll pay you for the repairs. That way, the landlord-tenant relationship is here, and this contractor-property owner relationship is here. And if you have a breakdown with the work that gets done, all right, the problem is isolated to that and that alone. Okay? The tenant still owes you the rent. And if they don't pay you the rent, you can go in and evict them, and you don't have the tenant interposing this contractual relationship that, hey, I don't have to pay because it's a deal, okay? And the way you do it as the professional is you have them give you that invoice, or you give them the estimate and you sign off on it. And everybody's hired a contractor before, right? So it's not like you haven't seen one of these, so just do that. But better yet, don't ever hire tenants to do work. You will thank me for it if you ever get yourself in one of those bogeys. Okay. All right. Remember I talked about that bankruptcy matter? Let me see if I got it. Aha, here we go. Yikes. This was a client that was collecting rent periodically and not applying it to the month that it was due. And what happened was, and this was a lot of pain for this particular client, they ended up having to give back all this rent money because they were collecting it in violation of the automatic stay. So, with your record keeping, when you collect rent, you apply it to that current month's rent. They owe you prior months, they owe you prior months. And then you call me, and we'll talk about how that works in a little bit. Okay, and here is the letter. This is the unhappy letter you will get from the guy that's going to make you miserable. This is one of the bankruptcy trustees. And this letter is the one he sent where, hey, he's investigating and he determined that you weren't applying the rent that you collected in the month that it was due. And guess what? You owe me $3,000 because you were a creditor collecting over a period of time. All right? So, bookkeeping matters. Okay, here we go. That little Dickens creating trouble. Okay, now, condition of the property. The legal standard is that a tenant must return the property to you in a clean condition, less normal wear and tear. Thank you. And if the damages are beyond normal wear and tear, then you can apply for damages when you go into that phase of an eviction. Now, here's the problem. What is normal wear and tear? Okay? Does anybody have a good idea what normal wear and tear means? Because there is no precise definition. The way I explain it to clients is, it's a number of factors. One of the factors is how long does the tenant live there? The longer they've been there, the more wear and tear you're going to have the problem. Okay? It is also a function of the things that we're talking about. So, holes in the wall, that's not normal wear and tear, right? Is the wall a little dirty? Well, dirt can be beyond normal wear and tear, but then you have to factor in how long they live there. And have you as the landlord repainted the walls? So it gets to be very interesting. So here's what I do. I try to define this in my form of lease right up front. And I put stuff in there. The tenant will return in as good a condition of cleanliness and repair as when the tenant first occupied the property. Okay? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to establish a standard that I can then put before a judge and get the judge to say, okay, this makes sense. Has anybody ever heard of broom swept clean as a standard? Like if you're a contractor? Yeah, okay. Generally, that's a good standard to measure these things by. But you can kind of get a little bit out there over your skis and be safe if you try to define this, because it tells tenants what you expect of them. So, I put stuff like this in my lease, and you're safe doing this. Hey, tenant, this is a single-family home. You got to maintain the yard and shrubbery. Okay, you're going to have your own garbage can. You'd be amazed how many tenants think that they don't have to deal with stuff like this. They got to put their garbage in the can, right? I also talk about the things that they need to have. This is a snippet from a single-family lease. So, hey, tenant, you got to mow the lawn, man, which means lawnmower. You got to have a vacuum cleaner. You got to have a plunger, okay? And you'll obviously have a conversation with the tenant about what doesn't go down the toilet. You're going to have a toolbox that has things like flat-headed Phillips head screwdriver, pliers, duct tape, and a flashlight. You put this in here because, again, remember I talked about the poker chips and credibility? This gives you some poker chips. This is common sense. And this works. I've had a judge, and I remember this distinctly, comment on this at one time. And he read it, and then he looked at the tenant and said, did you do this? And the tenant was, being stupid. And as soon as the tenant gave that stupid answer back to the judge, lights out, man. I was able to write that ticket for my client, and I got him everything he wanted. In fact, I was able to push for some more and got my client a better result than what I had predicted when we went in. So this kind of stuff works. Okay. And we talked about the legal standard, okay, and I put some of the law in here. This is all in the book. Ordinary wear and tear, okay? Ordinary is defined as the kind to be expected in the normal order of events that is routine or usual. Ordinary wear and tear refers to gradual deterioration of the condition of the rental premises results from its appropriate use over time. Here's a big one. The accumulation of dirt in and of itself is not ordinary wear and tear. So, you got somebody that's in there that's smoking, and the ceiling fans are disgusting, charge them, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about how you document your damages here so you can get a good recovery. Okay, here. This is where you're doing things for the tenant. How are we doing on time, by the way?
You're good.
Okay.
You're good.
All right, now, as I said, the tenant has a duty to use the property reasonably. And if they don't, these can be grounds for an eviction or a recovery of damages. I've actually done evictions based on tenants flushing the wrong things down toilets, breaking things, and stuff like that. So, it is good to have perspective on your hand. Now, generally speaking, with my office, when we do eviction, the deadline for our filings are Fridays at noon. And you go onto my website and download the Lake County eviction form. You complete it, get it to the ladies, get it to the paralegals before noon. We get it filed. Your hearing is the second Wednesday that follows, and they're out the week after that. Okay, so it's about 2.5 weeks turnaround. If the tenant is in there, and the eviction that my office prosecute, you're all in $510, which includes the eviction hearing and your damages hearing. Now, if the tenant is destroying your place, we can do an emergency eviction. It's going to cost more, but we can get an emergency eviction, and the grounds for that is they are physically damaging the place. And typically, I can get those evictions for you in about 72 hours, but those are a rarity. Okay, and it has to be demonstrable damage that appears to be of a continuing nature. Okay, here we go. At the termination of a tenant's occupancy, the tenant shall deliver the rental premises to the landlord in a clean and proper condition, excepting ordinary wear and tear, expected in the normal course of habitation. We've already talked about that a little bit. Okay. So what are your rights and remedies? Well, you can go in and you can seek damages. I'm going to move through this a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go back. No, here we go. Security deposit. This is where we're going to talk about that. How many people charge 1 month's rent for security deposit? Show me. How many people charge more? What do you charge? How about 2 months? Okay. What do you charge, please?
Right around double, yeah.
Right around double. Okay. Yes, sir. Reggie. 2 months. Okay. I suggest that you charge in a number that is not a multiple of rent. Okay? And the reason for that is I don't want there to be confusion with the tenant about what the security deposit is. A security deposit is not rent. It is a security deposit. And any tenant that thinks that they can use the security deposit as rent, they are legally wrong. And I feel that if you charge a number that's different than rent, that helps impress upon the tenant that this is not rent. Okay. How many people have sent a tenant after they move out a landlord-tenant security deposit letter? How many people don't know what I'm talking about? All right, so this is a big, big gotcha, and I want you guys, if you're taking notes, now is the time to start writing stuff down, okay? When a tenant leaves, they have to give you their new address in writing, okay? And that can happen anyway, and I'm going to talk about the gotchas that can come with this. And if they give you a new address in writing, you as a landlord have to tell the tenant what you're doing with the security deposit. And if you don't, guess what? Anybody know what happens if you don't do that? Yes, sir.
I think you gotta pay them back for double or something.
You gotta pay back the security deposit plus their attorney's fees when they sue you to get it back. And there's a presumption that there are no damages to property. And when do you think this gotcha happens? Well, it happens with the derelict tenant that just destroyed your property, right? So it's like rubbing salt in the wound if you don't send that letter. So, first and foremost, every one of you from now on, okay, I want everybody shaking their head. Jonathan, I promise I will always send a landlord-tenant security deposit to every tenant that leaves. Okay? Yes?
Yes.
Everybody, yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So, what's the next question you're going to ask me? Well, I know it, so I'll just say it. Well, Jonathan, they didn't give me the new address, so what do I do? Anybody? Mail it to the old address. Right. You mail it to the old address, and how are you going to mail it?
Certified letter with a receipt.
And first class mail. Okay? Certified and first class. Particularly if it's a deadbeat that has wiped you out and there's no good address, you send it first class and certified. Why do you do both ways? They forward first class mail if there's a forwarding order in place. And if one's not, you're going to get the certified mailer back, and you know. But more importantly, you can hold that certified mailer up in court and say, Your Honor, I tried. No new address. If I had one, I would have done it. It works. It works. Okay? And now you don't have that bogey of, well, Your Honor, they didn't send it. No damages. Give me my money back. Boy, that is a painful conclusion when I have to tell clients about it. Yes, Reggie? Okay. You as a landlord are charging that? Yeah. Okay. This is in the territory of, can I drive down the Borman going 100 miles an hour? Okay? Can you? We all can. And can you get away with it? Sometimes. But what happens when you get caught? Bad things, right? Okay. A non-refundable move-in fee, when you get caught, is when when you're evicting the deadbeat, and the judge looks at you and says, Reggie, what is that for? Reggie, did you charge a security deposit? And the judge is going to say, move-in fee is security deposit or penalty. You're praying that the judge says security deposit, because then you've got it to play with. If the judge says penalty, you might have to give it back. So don't do that. All right? Guys, listen, I know that we're all trying to make money. I've been a landlord. I represent landlords. Remember that pile of credibility chips? It's important when you're in the worst case scenarios, which is you're asking a judge to give you some relief from these derelicts. Be fair with these tenants, okay? And I'm gonna say another thing. Every once in a while, I have a client call me up and say, Jonathan, they gave me their security deposit, and they decided they didn't want the place. What should I do? Can I keep it? I'm like, yeah, probably. Did they sign the lease and not move in? Yeah. Okay. But guess what else is going to happen? The tenant's going to get ticked off because, that's how it is. They're going to turn around and sue you for the security deposit. And then you got this argument about the security deposit return, the statute here, which is a weak argument. But more to the point, whatever your security deposit is, you're probably going to spend that much hiring me to defend you from this stupid lawsuit. Okay? If the tenant is a derelict and they tell you they don't want it, be happy. You dodged a bullet. Move on. Find somebody else. This is still a landlord-friendly environment right now, right? Is anybody having a problem finding a good tenant? Show of hands. Okay. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can avoid the bad tenants here in a bit. So, All right, what are we talking about here? This is the obligation of how you report back to the tenant how you're using the security deposit. This is a letter, and in broad strokes what you have to do is you have to return a letter to that address that the tenant gave you, or the old address if they didn't give you one. And you have to explain what you're using it for. And you've got to break it down in sufficient detail so the tenant understands how they're being charged. So, for example, hole in walls, $500 to patch and repair. Repaint, $350. Fix hole in carpeting or repair carpeting, $500. And you put all that stuff in here, okay? And you put the tenant's name, property address, date the lease is signed, all this. This is a form that you can, if you don't have it, if you do an eviction with me, you get this. It's part of that $510 you pay. If you don't have this, but you want this form, you can get on my website, and in my forms section, you can buy this thing. I think I sell it for 25 bucks. And the reason I do that is because I want you guys to have good forms. Okay, here's the yikes. And I just talked about the yikes, so I got a little bit ahead of myself. If you don't send this letter within 45 days of the tenant moving out, a yikes occurs, right? The tenant can turn around and sue you and recover not only the security deposit, but the attorney's fees. So don't do that. Send the letter, always. Okay, holdover. This is what happens when a tenant stays beyond the term of the lease. Okay, and let me see what I put in here. Okay, now here's where things get a little bit wonky. Years ago, everybody said, hey, the tenant holds over, it's a month-to-month tenancy, and there you go. And everybody just was in agreement on that. And then what happened? COVID happened. Next thing you know, the judges actually started looking at the law on holdovers. And because, remember, we couldn't evict tenants, and the only way you could evict a tenant during COVID was if the lease had expired, right? We all remember that? Some of us maybe? Okay. And I stopped doing monetary-based evictions, and all the evictions were based on expiration of lease. So the judges started looking at this, and they got into the law, and they discovered old case law that said if the lease runs for a year or more, the holdover is a year at a time. That made evictions tough during COVID, because if the tenant stays beyond the expiration of the lease and you accept another rental payment, they're now in there for another year, not month to month, okay? So, here is the important thing. Either A, you don't accept that next rent payment after the lease is up, and you insist the tenant sign a new lease with you on whatever terms you want. Or B, if you want it to be month to month after the expiration of the initial term, make sure you got that language in your lease, all right? Because if we have another situation with COVID, the judges are going to be scrambling to find ways not to evict tenants. Okay, so holdover. Notice of default. This is important because we are so close to Illinois and things are different in Illinois. In Illinois, do we have anybody here that's an Illinois landlord? Yes, okay. And what do you have to give a tenant if they're behind on rent before you can file an eviction?
Notice.
A 5-day notice, right?
Well, it depends.
But depends, I agree. But generally speaking, you have to give a 5-day notice. All right, and there's other circumstances where you have to give a 30-day notice or other things like that.
Depends on how long they've lived there.
Yeah. Okay. Here in Indiana, we don't have that rule. Okay? Instead, what we have is a default rule that goes back to the 1800s that says if the tenant's delinquent in rent, you have to give a 10-day notice. Well, that's only true if the rent is payable in arrears. What does that mean? The rent is due at the end of the term, and how did that apply? Well, my research on it has led me to conclude that most land rental back in the 1800s was farmland, and the rent was due after the crops came in, okay? Rent is due in arrears. Here, you guys are renting apartments or houses, right? Does anybody rent just land? Okay, that's the typical response. Houses and apartments. And when's the rent due? It's the beginning of every month. We talked about that. Sometimes it's the beginning of a term. So you don't have to give a notice, and that's good for you. Okay. So here are some things though, when we're still in the yikes category. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, make sure your lease has a jury waiver provision. The last client that didn't have one, who had a crazy eviction with an attorney on the other side, she spent $25,000 in legal fees. Okay? That's what a jury trial will cost you. All of my leases have jury waivers. Okay? Make sure you have that. Okay, and this is what one of these looks like. And actually, there's some other beneficial language in here that talks about waiving consequential damages, which is, you're in really crazy territory if you're going there, but I put this stuff in, okay? All right. I see people taking photos, good. And trust me, guys, I would rather, if you guys want this, I will help you. I will sell these things to you, which is basically a nominal charge to help cover my internet costs, okay? But more importantly, I want you to have this because I don't like the pain some of these mistakes have caused people, and I want you guys to avoid this stuff. Okay. Problems when you buy a house. All right. Make sure that the NIPSCO has been on when you buy the place. I think in Hammond, is it 90 days now if it's been off? It has to be re-inspected, right? Does anybody know? Okay. Okay, so what happens is if the NIPSCO's been off for a period of time and you try to turn it back on, NIPSCO tells you, oh, you need to have it re-inspected. And if that inspector comes out, guess what's happening? Get your checkbook out, man, because it always has to be upgraded to code, whatever code is today. That's expensive, so check to make sure that the NIPSCO is working when you go in and buy a house. All right. Tax sale. Anybody ever bought a property at tax sale? Okay, I see somebody, I see Les back there. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about tax sales, just to give you an overview. There are two kinds of tax sales here in Indiana. They are known as the treasurer's sale and the commissioner's sale. In broad strokes, the treasurer's sale is the sale that occurs when a property is initially delinquent in taxes. It typically occurs in the fall. I think here in Lake County, is it in September, right, Les?
Mid-September.
Yeah, mid-September. And when you buy, you're not actually buying the house. You're buying what's called a tax sale certificate that references the amount of money that you paid for the property, and property is exposed to a bidding process. The opening bid is the pass-through taxes, and then other people can bid up to whenever the bidding stops. You have to do a lot of due diligence. You have to look at these properties, make sure it makes sense. You don't have a right to go in them, so there's a lot of unknowns about what you're getting, and you can get a pig in a poke sometimes. But it's a popular way of bidding. You're a successful bidder, you get a tax sale certificate, and then there's a series of notices that you have to issue, known as the 4.5 and 4.6 notices, and you wait a year, and then you can petition for the deed. If the property does not get sold at the treasurer's sale, it is then re-exposed later at what's called a commissioner's sale, where the redemption period is much shorter. It's a 4-month period. You still have to send out those notices. And if the property doesn't sell or is not redeemed, then you can similarly petition for deed on those commissioner sale properties. Okay, it's a complicated process. The noticing themselves is not something for the faint of heart, and you should engage counsel before you engage in something like this, okay? All right, eviction notice. Let me see here. This right here. Okay, this was oh, I got it. One of the big gotchas with tax sale noticing, or tax sale purchasing, is making sure you are actually buying what you think you are buying. So I'm going to illustrate one of the concerns about this to offer a cautionary tale. The northern counties, or the northern cities here in Lake County, and I've heard this anecdotally, so this is as good an explanation as I've ever come up with. Back in the day, when they were subdivided, it was 25-foot lot lines, but the codes didn't permit, generally speaking, construction on a 25-foot frontage. So frequently what happened is houses would be built, and the legal description would be all of lot 1 and the southerly half of lot 2, and you had a 37.5-foot frontage. Well, guess what happens? Those two different lots, that all of lot 1 and that portion of lot 2, they kept them as separate tax numbers on the tax roll. And somebody would not pay the taxes on like the southerly half of lot 2, which contained like a sliver of the garage on it. That would go up for sale, and I can't tell you how many times. It seemed like there was a period of time here where I was having this happen about every 6 months. Somebody bought the sliver of the garage thinking they were getting the whole house. Okay? Not good. So you definitely want to investigate this. There's actually an attorney out there that does a lot of work on this. His name is Rick Dawson. Anybody know Rick? Anybody heard of him? Okay, there's another attorney, Mike Kovachkov. He's a good one. These are the guys that do tax sale work, and if any of you guys want to move into that territory, grab one of my cards and I'll be happy to give you the contact information for these guys. But it's a specialized niche practice area, and the guys that do it in bulk volume, and they can give you good prices for the noticing. Okay, and what I've got here is illustrating the pain that people suffer if they buy the sliver of the garage. So I'm going to move through this. Okay, problems with the city. East Chicago, here's one. Okay, I see this most often with tenants that come from Chicago. They go derelict, they stop paying, you get ready, you're following up with them, hey, what's going on? And this frequently happens with landlords that that sort of get into the weeds with the tenant. And I'm going to offer you a better way of handling tenants in a moment here. But if you get into it with the tenant, some of these Chicago tenants, their default reaction to you saying things they don't like is they call the city. And what the city does is it comes out and they write you up for all kinds of crazy stuff, and it costs you money. So I strongly urge people not to get into the weeds with tenants, okay? Remember, these tenants are not family. You're not inviting them over for Thanksgiving. They're customers. Treat them like that. And every once in a while you get a bad one, just the price of doing business, get rid of them. Okay, Hammond, another example. Tenants pulling the nonsense, they call unsafe. All right, and I'm just going to skip through this. Whiting, this is fun. If there's too many police calls, Whiting loves to do this. There's too many police calls at the property. Instead of raising the stink with the tenants, they drop the hammer on you, the landlord, okay? So, if you got a bad tenant, my suggestion is you boot them, okay? And let me go through here. Oh, NIPSCO reversion. Is anybody familiar with this? Anybody? Okay. This is a nice deal that NIPSCO offers. And I encourage you, you can take a photo of this if you want. Basically what it is you can send a letter to NIPSCO, and what this letter does is if the tenant moves out, think winter time, February, and they turn the utilities off, NIPSCO will automatically revert the utilities back to your name so that the furnace doesn't turn off. Okay? Now, the important thing is, if you ever sell the house, you got to send another letter to NIPSCO telling them, cancel this. Otherwise, NIPSCO, 10 years later, will send you a bill for the NIPSCOs being turned off, and then when you try to fight them on it, they'll say, well, you never told us to cancel this. All right? So make sure you do that. But this is a nice deal, and I would encourage you guys to do this. Okay? And this is part of it. You can call NIPSCO, and this is some of the paperwork that they're going to have you do. But it's a nice deal. Okay. Problems with tenants. Aha. Now, this is the most important part of the talk tonight. Landlording can be easy if you let it be. Okay? It can be really, really easy. And it starts with how you and the tenant get to know each other. So, basically, you as a landlord have two hats that you wear. And it depends on who has the keys to the property. When you have the keys, you're wearing the find a good tenant hat. Okay? That's your job. Find a good tenant. And the ways that I think you can do it nowadays are you use the clerks, the Indiana and Illinois clerks' websites to find out if the tenants have ever been evicted. For the most part, my take on this is if you have an applicant that's ever been evicted, don't rent. Just that simple. All right? The days of the credit reporting bureaus, those have gone the way of the dinosaur. 20 years ago, you could get a credit report on the tenant. Can't do that anymore. So you got to use the information available. Get online. You can call my office. Ask for Roberta, and Roberta will send you the web links for the Indiana Clerk's website and the Circuit Court of Cook County website, and then you look it up. You get an application, and I sell these application forms on my website, but whatever you do, plug in the tenant's name in these two websites, and if they've ever been evicted, don't rent to them, okay? And then it goes without saying, if the tenant acts squirrely with you during any part of the application process, pull the lease back and say thanks, but no thanks, okay? So that's the only thing you need to look for. All right, now, at some point, you're going to take that one hat off. Let's call the white hat the find the good tenant hat. And the blue hat is the tenant is in the property, and what do I do? Okay? At some point, you're taking the white hat off. And when does that happen? That happens when you're signing the lease with the tenant. And at that moment, you or your property manager or your helper or whoever needs to have a talk with the tenant. And here's how this talk goes. Tenant, we want to be good landlords. So, we need you to help us. And the way you can help us is you tell us anytime there's a problem with the property. You see, we don't have cameras here, and nobody's here keeping an eye on you. You're an adult, you're doing your thing. So, if the toilet starts leaking Monday morning, call us Monday morning. Don't wait till 5 o'clock on Friday night with some SOS emergency and expect that we're going to drop everything and get a plumber out that evening. No. Plumber's coming out the next time they're available, which is Monday or Tuesday of next week. And you know what? You're using the toilet at McDonald's this weekend. Right? Okay. So, I promise, and you'd say this, tenant, I promise you if you call me, we will get people out to work on stuff as quickly as we can. Is that reasonable? Yeah. And if they don't shake their head to that, what do? Yank the lease and move on, right? Okay. Then this is what you say to the tenant. And this goes all the way back to the very beginning of the talk about when the rent is due. Tenant, the rent is due on the 1st. Not the 2nd, not the 5th, not the 10th. It's the 1st. And I'm not going to chase you for it. Now, that's you chatting. I would call them first time or so. But you say, I'm not going to chase you for it. If the rent doesn't come in, I'm just going to evict you, and I'm going to find another tenant that can work with you, okay? But I'm gonna do you one better, tenant. You know, we've got these late fees in here. I wanna work with you. If you think you're not gonna be able to pay the rent on the 1st, call me. Call me beforehand. I would appreciate you calling me. And in fact, I'll probably waive your late fees just so long as we all understand that the rent is due within a reasonable period of time, 10 or 15 days, or whatever you agree on. And if you don't pay it, I'm gonna evict you, okay? Again, be reasonable with your tenants. And I promise you, if you give the tenants the talk, you will cut down on the drama and the finger snapping, why you doing me like that stuff, all right? Because when they don't pay you, they know what's coming, okay? They know they're gonna get the hook. So, please consider doing that. All right, what are we doing here? Okay, and here's the evictions, indianaeviction.com, and there you go. How we do, Les? Good?
Very good.
All right. I have, do I have time? I can take a few questions, or am I out of time?
Yes, you do.
All right. Yes, sir.
With regard, incidentally, this is very concise and very informative. The question I have is, with regard to the tax sales and all that stuff, would you define quiet title, what the process is and why you do it?
Yes. Okay. It's an excellent question. The tax sale process has a component that falls upon your head. You buy that tax sale certificate, and you, the certificate holder, have to issue notices. And they're known as the 4.5 and 4.6 notices. Title companies hate this. They hate it, okay? And even though a tax deed strips all interest holders of their interest in the property, the title companies are suspicious of this. And when you get a title report for a tax deeded property, it still has the names of everybody that ever had an interest in the property. And the reason for that is the title companies don't know if you actually issued those notices. All right? Because if they weren't properly issued, the tax deed is defective and it can be overturned on litigation. So, the title companies insist upon an additional step called a quiet title action, where you actually litigate the correctness of the notices that you gave. And if you did it correctly, it's usually a slam dunk. But that is the additional step that the title companies insist upon before they will give you a clean title report. Make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Les will take the microphone there.
Chris and then Stephen.
My question is, what is the grace period is for? And also, does it matter, could you talk about not renting it to a tenant who has bankruptcy? So does it matter what type of bankruptcy they have? And also, if the bankruptcy has been settled,
Okay.
does it change anything?
So when you say grace period, are you referring to a rental grace period? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like grace periods. I say no, don't give grace period. Tell the tenant the rent is due and say pay. All right? If you give a grace period, you're sending mixed signals. Tenant, the rent's due on the 1st, but you have until the 5th. Well, okay, if you're gonna bend like that, where the tenant starts thinking, well, you might bend somewhere else, right? So just say the rent's due. It's on the 1st. And you give them the talk, remember? 2 hats. Give them the talk. And you make it clear what this is. Now, when it comes to bankruptcy, generally speaking, I don't view a bankruptcy as a necessarily disqualifying event for renting to a tenant. If they are in bankruptcy, when you talk with them, you don't touch them. All right? Don't touch them. Because again, we talked about automatic stay and all that stuff. But if they've had a bankruptcy and it's over, yeah, I think what you're really looking for are tenants, what you're really scanning for are tenants with a history of screwing landlords, right? Yeah. If they have a history of screwing landlords, you could be next. That's why I say don't rent to a tenant that has an eviction on the rent. All right? If they, haven't paid medical bills or something like that, hey, life happens, man. That's probably the reason they're a tenant, not a landlord. So, but no evictions. Yes, sir.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. You're a very knowledgeable attorney. One of the things that I wanted to bring up on that NIPSCO thing that you talked, the emergency shut off, and if you're not paying attention, one of the problems we had when the tenant failed to pay it, they went into disconnect, then it automatically goes back to your account. If you're not paying attention, you could have that bill.
Yeah, bingo. So that is a judgment call, whether you want to do it, but it's a service that's available, and I bring it up because personally for me it saved my rear end on more than one occasion. I had somebody, skip out in the middle of February. It happens. So, yes, Reggie.
Hold on.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
He's got
I'm
the
sorry.
mic, and then I'll bring it.
I've probably done like 8 or 10 evictions in the last 16 years, and I've always just thought like if they couldn't pay me now, no reason in chasing the money, give myself bigger headaches, so I just kind of wanted a vacant property and off I went. If you do get a judgment, 3, 4, or 5 grand, how do you get paid back from this person? Like, what's the process look like on that?
Good luck.
Okay, so stick with what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, one of the things that I have done as an eviction attorney, I have the fastest eviction process that you can find anywhere. It is far and away the fastest, okay? And the reason for that is because I've been sitting in the chairs that you guys are sitting in right now, okay? And I understand what you want. When the tenant goes bad, and that's when you're wearing that other hat. And I guess I didn't really talk about that other hat. The blue hat, the one that you put on after you rent to the tenant, that's your hat that you wear, and what you're looking for is sniffing out when tenants go bad. That's all you do. When the tenant's in your property, you have your antenna up, looking for indications that the tenant is going bad, okay? And once you recognize that the tenant has gone bad, you boot him. Plain and simple. And I know, I've been doing this so long, landlords anguish over this. Oh, can I baby him along and get him through winter or whatever? Look, when they've gone bad, they've gone bad. And it's not just them not paying you rent, they're doing other things that you don't want them to do, okay? They're not paying the water bill. They're not taking care of the place, okay? The tenant's already checked out, and they're putting their money in to their cell phone bill or whatever else they're doing, okay? And they're not taking care of the things that you need them to do, so you just boot them. And when I have clients come to me and say, I want to collect on this tenant, I'm like, man, the best collection attorneys are lucky to collect 15 cents on the dollar. So here's what I have done. I've given you the fastest eviction you can find anywhere. Guys, if you are sniffing around for bad tenants and all the signs are there, they've been late paying you, they've been giving you excuses and whatnot, hey, come on, put the dots together. Tenant's going bad, get ready for it. And then the month comes where they don't pay you. By the 10th of the month, you just file. If you are keeping an eye on the ball, you can theoretically have them out within the month that the rent wasn't paid, and you haven't missed a beat if you've got a big enough security deposit, right? So that's what you need to do. You always want, in my opinion, you as landlords always want to be looking forward, looking down the road. If you are looking backwards, you're going to give yourself an ulcer. Don't do that. Okay. Anybody else?
I've got 3 more I'm gonna have to, I'm sorry, guys. Reggie, Eugene, and then Nick. We're gonna have to.
Okay.
Okay, it's very good. I got that problem right now, I'm over in Crook County. The thing is, I got a management company. I said, well, the tenant's always late. They said, well, by the time we get rid of them, we'll lose 2 months rent, because they get 8% from management, 10%. They don't want to do it. Let's give them a chance. Give them a chance. And how much do you think is a decent late fee?
Here's my answer. Sell your Illinois properties and buy rental properties in Indiana. Okay? That's the answer. Really.
Okay, so I don't have a question. I have a lot of Illinois properties, but, so you said one thing earlier about move-in fees. Somebody asked a question on move-in fees. I don't do deposits in Illinois because you have to put deposits in an interest-bearing account. It's legal to do move-in fees in Illinois. So I just wanted to sort of clarify that.
Okay, and I don't question or doubt that. I'm merely sharing my experience as an eviction attorney and the tremendous skepticism that judges have for landlords trying to get around the ordinary course of conducting business. And it could be different in Illinois. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I have a good friend who's an attorney that advises me, let the shoemaker make the shoes. So if your lease is $1 or $100 or $1,000, use his lease because he's the shoemaker making shoes and you will help with the eviction. I can't say enough about how much I learned tonight. And best eviction was the free eviction move.
All right, well, you want a job? That's great, thank you. Anybody else?
Now, we're gonna have to cut it off there. I'm gonna ask you to stay to the end, because we did advertise this till 9, but we had our speaker, and I understand if you have to go, but.
I do have to go, unfortunately.
I
Now, I do have my books back there. I've got 4 back there,
Yes.
and I'm gonna tell you, that's it. I am out of this production run, so if you guys wanna buy a book, get it tonight, because once I sell out, I am probably not going to be buying another round of books for a while. So if you want them, anybody come back and buy these remaining 4 books now, okay?
I did place his card on the back table, you can take a picture of it, but I was talking to the people here. I want you to be able to meet these vendors, because they're the ones that are making this happen. Okay, they rented tables. So I'd ask you to stay to the end. Jonathan, he went longer than he, I'm very grateful.
I'm happy to go along with a
I'm
great
very
group like
grateful.
this.
No, I'm very grateful.